緒に打ちます。
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Briareos Kerensky and welcome to the third part of Crimson Shadows, my retrospective on the Senran Kagura franchise. To cover the 2 versus games plus burst renewal in one video, I skipped all over the timeline, so let's wind back clocks to 2014 for Senran Kagura's second game on the PlayStation Vita and the series' first spin-off.
さあ、いよいよ始まる第1回デカ盛り美食大会。叶えたい願いはただ一つ、でかいおっぱいを手に入れて胸を張って生きること。
今貧乳って言ったでしょ。いやいや、被害妄想だから。
いざ尋常に勝負。
This will take the form of a read-me game called Dekamori Senran Kagura and will be released on the Japanese PlayStation Store on March 20th. Or at least the first half of it was. The base game features Asuka's and Omura's teams, with the other 2 factions made available as DLC 1 month later. The 2 halves were priced the same, a scheme that was unfortunately repeated when the game was ported in America and Europe as Senran Kagura Bon Appetit. Atypical for a Senran Kagura game, both American and European versions will came out within the year, hitting digital storefronts in November. Development duties moved to Meteorize, a studio that focused and will focus their efforts on the mobile market, with only a handful of console games in their portfolio, most of them on the Vita. They are still in business, but of all their mobile games, only Kirara Fantasia is still in operation.
我に傷をつけるか。後悔するぞ。
As a read-me game, Dekamori is okay, but this comes from someone without an extensive knowledge of the genre. It is a fun game, mostly thanks to Asuka's grandfather Hanzo. He serves as judge for the culinary matches and he has the most elaborate descriptions for the dishes he has to taste. Clearing a battle with perfect or near perfect score is also rewarded by a delicious diorama of the defeated girl. All girls in Dekamori get one new music track, with a handful of characters getting a song with vocals. There are some good tracks. I especially like how Murasaki's track changes mid-song in a perfect representation of her personality. It's not the longest game ever, but all girls get their own storyline and there is an arcade mode if you want to aim for the best score. After a mere 5 months from Dekamori, Japan will get the only Senran Kagura game with a numeral in the title, Senran Kagura 2 Shinku, this time returning to the 3DS. And Shinku wears that 2 very proudly because it's a complete reimagining of the original formula, keeping the same side-scrolling stages but pretty much upping everything to 11, from the graphical presentation, story to combat mechanics. It's also the first game that squarely shifts the perspective from the fight between good and evil shinobis to the fight against the Yoma, and formally introduces the concept of Kagura, or the most powerful shinobi. Compared to what came before, the story is much darker, and while it doesn't deal away with comical interludes completely, it is quite the change from Burst or Shinobi Versus. This change is accompanied with a complete revamp of the graphical presentation and... this is a beautiful game despite the 3DS limitations. Tamsoft pulled all the stops, bosses and even enemies get their own animated introduction, cutscenes open the most important chapters, and a lot of care has gone in pretty much every aspect of the game. It's also the only game with extra weapons for all characters, although they only change visually and not structurally. Combat still relies on long combos and air launches, but shifts away a bit with the introduction of buddies during certain missions, which you can switch between during combos and perform special combination attacks with. Characters themselves are profoundly different, with a lot of them featuring a more technical approach to combat and far more variety than ever before. Rather than just having special attacks that deal damage in one move, several girls use them to temporarily shift stances, completely altering their moveset and how they feel. There is no better example of this than Katsuragi, whose heavy attack changes how she moves and approaches enemies. Mirai can swap between 3 different weapons, each with its own moveset and tactic: normal physical attacks, long-range single target, or brutally slow-ranged area of effect. Haruka now fights with a robot that builds up steam, and if not released with a heavy attack button, it explodes, knocking Haruka down and breaking the combo. Frantic got the biggest overall, as girls need to be transformed and with a maxed out special meter to trigger it. Entering Frantic mode will still destroy clothes, give extra speed, infinite specials, and damage increases the higher the combo counter is. However, girls will constantly lose health until all enemies are defeated. Combat arenas are now an in-between of the linear stages in Burst and the 3D stages in Shinobi, which doesn't work as well as it should, and despite the lock-on, bosses can get slippery, with your character able to hit them only once or twice before needing to reorient towards them. The camera tends to be a bit too far from the action, and on the 3DS screen, things can get a bit confusing. Shinku completely revises combat mechanics without straying too far from the original formula, and while it's not perfect, hello again bosses with super armor, it's what every sequel should be. I still prefer Burst over this, but I cannot deny that I would have loved to see the series continue to evolve this formula, or at least take a current system and give it the same level of attention that Shinku has received. To connect to my distaste for Estival Versus, keep in mind that it came out almost a year after Shinku, with no spin-offs or anything else in between them, and I think you can see why I was so disappointed by Estival. Shinku introduces only 2 new girls, Naraku and Kagura, who are unfortunately not playable, despite both having a complete moveset. The story revolves around these 2 characters, almost taking the spotlight from the rest, and their narrative arc is very well done. Just like the Mikagura sisters, however, they will be criminally underused by the future games. Shinku, rechristened Deep Crimson, would reach American shores on August 2015 and Europe a month later. I never got any of the Western releases before starting this video series, and I was quite surprised to see that the European edition goes for 2 or even 300 euros on auction sites, while the American Double D edition, featuring game and soundtrack, can be obtained for almost its retail price. Or I was really lucky, I don't know. The Japanese limited edition features chibi figures of Homura's squad, finally, along with the soundtrack.
また妙な大会に巻き込まれてしまったな。参加するべきかどうか迷うところだが。
そうだね、みやび。まったく馬鹿げた話だよ。水鉄砲で打ち合いだなんて。
まあ、そんなことをしたら服がびしょ濡れのスケスケになってしまうしな。
あ、みやび。これは妙な大会なんかじゃない。
After Estival Versus in 2015, Senran Kagura would enter a short hiatus, without any games, anime or manga made in Japan until March 2017, when the series' second spin-off, Peach Beach Splash, would hit the PlayStation 4. During this pause, Marvelous created Honey Parade Games, a subsidiary dedicated to manage the Senran Kagura franchise, with Takaki as the lead. Tamsoft is once again the main developer behind this new game. Peach Beach Splash has what I find the funniest premise of all the games. Everyone is teleported to a heavenly tropical island to take part in the P1 Grand Prix, organized by the shadowy Meiyun and broadcasted all over the Shinobi world through the power of NewTube, and hosted by Miss R and Mr. K, totally not Rina and Kiriya with a mask. Peach Beach Splash, or PBS for short, is a 5-on-5 third-person shooter with a heavy emphasis on multiplayer. There is a story mode, but it's rather short and surprisingly easy. My suggestion is to play the hardest difficulty right from the beginning, so that you'll receive more experience, more money and better items. PBS is very grind heavy, and any item, character level and outfit you have unlocked in single player will move to multiplayer and vice versa. This does create an entry wall for new players, as they won't be able to deal and absorb enough damage, and it can be frustrating being rendered useless by high-level players bristling high-level weaponry or items, but overall the experience is very enjoyable thanks to the fast-paced nature of the matches. The tone of story mode is very light, and this is clearly exemplified by the bosses. In one fight you have to make a giant Riona wet to shrink her down to standard size. In another fight you have to stop a leaking robot to reach Rin, Miss R, who is tied to a pole. Wait, why would you stop that? Anyway, this culminates in a final battle where Agent 3 battles a rapping DJ Octavio riding a giant robot to rescue Captain Cuttlefish. Wait, that's Splatoon. PBS sees the 4 team leaders against a rapping DJ Ryoki riding a giant robot, and I love DJ Ryoki. There are no new characters in PBS, but a number of girls from the mobile game, New Wave, make their console debut. Even before starting this video series, I would recall PBS being a fun game, and it still is. Multiplayer is still going on, even if not as strongly as before, and yeah, it's fun. Western players wouldn't have to wait long for PBS to reach them, as Exceed in America and Marvelous in Europe would publish the game in September of the same year. The limited editions across all regions are remarkably similar. All include an art book, a bunch of DLCs, a soundtrack, and a Blu-ray disc with intro animations from all over the franchise. The Japanese edition sadly didn't feature any chibi figures, but it had a more elaborate case for the soundtrack and animation discs. The American version is called No Shirt, No Shoes, All Service, and had a different outer cover. Europe, once again, doubles down on limited editions with the Girls of Paradise version, pretty much what other regions did, and the Girls of Paradise DX version, which added to the previous version a mousepad with Yumi's, features. And as a last note, the outfits Hibari and Naraku are wearing on the artbook and this case covers are absolutely gorgeous. Although not being a beat-em-up, PBS is officially part of the Senran Kagura timeline, as it introduces the evil god Shin, gives a context about why this otherworldly island exists, and the ending sequence even teases Senran Kagura 7. And now I'm sad. From this point onwards the future won't be particularly bright for Senran Kagura, but this sad story is for the next chapter.
なりたい自分になれましたか?
Briareos Kerensky, over and out.